Today the topic is starting the Orthodox way of life, the life of repentance. So we'll be beginning to talk about what we do as Orthodox Christians as opposed to what we believe.
It's yours or mine?
No, you can have them.
I think it might have been from last time. Oh, it's from last time? Oh, I've got this.
Okay, the purpose,
He didn't give out anything today.
going back to the first session, right? We talked about the Orthodox scientist, if you will, the way of knowing of a Orthodox saint. We talked about is what I'm just going to summarize here, that the apostles and the fathers became one with God. They became united with God and had direct knowledge with Him. Obviously, the apostles had it because they were with Christ, right? And then the early church fathers, they all had the kind of practices that brought them where they would have the Holy Spirit living within them in a very vivid kind of way, that they had this direct knowledge of God. And so they knew in this very deep inner way that transcends all the knowledge of this world. So it wasn't an intellectual knowledge that we have from the church fathers, but a deep insight coming from their relationship with God. So this is the difference between science, as we talked about, and the spiritual way of knowing that we know in the Orthodox Church. So they became like Him had this knowledge that they had of God. They then worked on themselves to become like them so they could lead others. So they became an example, and from that example they then could lead others as well as teach them. Good morning, good morning. So what is our purpose? George? What is our purpose?
Yeah, George.
I'm just kidding.
Our purpose is to serve the Lord.
Anyone else? What's our purpose? It's the same as the apostles and the church fathers, right? It's no different. We have exactly the same purpose. We're supposed to know God and come and develop this direct relationship with God, and have the same kind of power and knowledge that they had. That's our purpose. It's no different. We're no different than they are. We want to become one with God and have a direct relationship with Him and unite our will with His will. So it becomes Thy will be done rather than my will be done, right? So I'm thinking of Margot here, right? With her will being done, with going to have her title the way she wants it, right? So you can see how it starts at a very young age that we develop this strong will of my will be done, right? Yeah, so it's something this is part of what we have to work on, to learn to surrender to God and to let His will be what's guiding us. So how do we attain this union with God? What we call theosis. What is it we do? Is it got to be the question that we all have, right? And this ought to be a serious question that we all have. So as we begin to talk about this, you got to think about what are you going to do in your life to make these things real in your life so you can have the same direct relationship with God as the apostles and the church fathers had. So there's no sense going through what the rest we're going to talk about unless you're going to seriously consider adopting some of these things into your way of life. Otherwise, it's just talk, right? So as we think about it, let's try to make it more than talk. So this is a lifelong process. So we got to consider that. I think in the night class I had a big discussion about, I can't be. I think we had this class too. I can't be perfected, right? But we got to remember that perfection, the way it's written and what it means in the Bible, isn't like a state that you attain. It's an ongoing process of perfecting rather than just perfection. So the way it's used in Scripture indicates a lifelong process. When Christ says, "You be perfect," He means you will work your whole life to become perfected like me. So it begins with our faith, right? We got to believe in the basic teachings of the church of Jesus and all He did for us and all that was taught that we read in the gospel books. And then we enter into Christ, right, through baptism. And then, or later on, if we've been baptized as infants, we'll usually come back and renew our faith through confession, and this we're supposed to do every year, at least once a year, or maybe twice a year. So we got a season coming up. It's a good time to prepare for confession, which is the Nativity fast period, or Lent is another period. So those are two, and maybe the fast of the Theotokos that we have in August, right? Those are three good periods to always prepare for confession as a renewal of our faith. Faith and confession will be the same thing as baptism. It renews not only our commitment, but it cleanses us from all the sin that we have accumulated. So there's no systematic approach for any of us. Each person's path is unique, so we're all going to go through different trials and tribulations. We're all going to have different sinful tendencies than others. We'll all have a tendency of some nature, but it may be quite different than someone else. So we can't come up with a formula of what you do to purify your heart, so you will have this direct experience with God. So remember, it's purification, illumination, and then theosis, right? So we first purify the heart. So, and that's Christ told us, that a pure heart you will see God, or be one with God. So there's a comprehensive view that's given by St. Theophan the Recluse, and he was one of my early teachers. That's why I include his little summary here, just to introduce him to you. He is a Russian saint. He comes from the 1815 to 1894, so he's got some modern sense to him, right? And his teachings, he didn't set out to teach monks. He sought out to teach lay people, and he was a bishop for most of his life and spent the last 20 years or so of his life in recluse. And he studied very deeply the teachings of the Desert Fathers, and he visited throughout Palestine and went to the various monasteries there and accumulated the teachings and summarized some of the teachings in what's known as the Philokalia. And in his last 20 years, as I mentioned, he was a recluse. So, basically his teaching encompasses, this is the outline of his book, The Path to Salvation, which we read in one of our Monday night sessions, I think a couple years ago. And they have it in the bookstore if you're interested. But it's very good and very clear and meant for us and not for monks, as I said. So first is this awakening. So you may have been baptized, but at some point, like I take my personal life, there was a point where I was awakened from being a very poor Orthodox Christian, quite frankly. And so many years, even though I became Orthodox because I married a Greek girl, and I had to become Greek, right? So how do you become Greek? You join the Orthodox Church, right? Yes, ma'am. I love it. Yeah, sure. So I become Orthodox. But then I got to admit that many years I had struggled coming to church on Sundays. And Kathy would always be dragging and pulling. And then it was all Greek, and I still don't appreciate all the Greek that's in church, because I speak English, so the Greek has absolutely no meaning to me when I just listen to it, but we read the translation so we get some sense. So that was always my excuse. It was all in Greek, boring, but there always something that tugged at me when I went there. But anyway, I was always on this kind of seeking path, so I went down the path of studying Buddhism and got into Buddhist meditation and that sort of thing, and then found a guru in India called Saint Aurobindo, who is very Western in his thinking and has this evolutionary kind of thought. So he's very open-minded and doesn't really focus on any. And Hinduism is like that; it embraces all religions. And then had a meditation teacher who taught passage meditation. Well, it turns out passage meditation that he was taught is almost identical to the teaching of the Jesus Prayer. And so I began to practice the Jesus Prayer. And in practicing the Jesus Prayer, all the doubts that I had about Jesus began to wipe away, because I had these concerns about, are these miracles real? Like being an engineer and all that, miracles and that kind of stuff were hard for me to accept and believe. And so then there was nature kind of opened me, because we were living out in what's now the Diaconia Center, and every day walking through the woods, and all of a sudden God began to speak to me. So that was an awakening that I had at this point in time that now brought me to the point of seeking a spiritual father. And in seeking a spiritual father, I had to prepare for my first confession, because even when I was chrismated, they didn't ask for a confession. They should have, but they didn't. So that was like an awakening. So I began this whole process. And then once you have this awakening, the key is to maintain that zeal so you don't lose it. And this is what St. Theophan teaches you, that we'll have this awakening after we've been baptized, even though we may have fallen asleep, so to speak, in terms of the Orthodox teachings. But then through confession and the process of repentance, we're brought right back in to the point where we were at our baptism. And then we start to then follow the teachings of the church if you have a good spiritual father. So maintaining zeal then becomes this process that's really important, that once we are really dedicated to Christ, we got to do everything we can to maintain it. So he teaches about that. And then the ongoing process of purification, the idea that this is a life of repentance. It isn't a one-time act, but it's an ongoing process, and one that we're working to attract God's grace through our ascetic practices. So our daily prayer routines, our daily our regular fasting routines, and so on, are all a process of attracting grace, which is the Holy Spirit that's going to work through us, that's going to enable us to do what Christ taught us to do, to be like Him. And then we have also the spiritual warfare that we have to deal with. So each day we're going to get up, or we're going to face battles that are cause us to sin, right? So if we reflect a little bit in the morning about those battles that are coming up and prepare ourselves, at the end of the day, kind of reflect on that process, we can discern how well we carried out the battle today, because it is a battle every day. We're going to face some situation that's going to maybe throw us off our path that's true to the way Christ taught us. So he teaches a lot about that. And then the idea of being fully prepared and having full participation in the sacraments of the church. This should be a regular, ongoing, weekly participation in the Holy Communion with full participation for that event. And that'll keep you strong, enable you to do all the other things as well. And all of this is about nurturing grace within us, to attain the Holy Spirit, because it's only through grace that we're going to be able to reach this perfection that Christ has called us to. We can't do it on our own will. So that's what St. Theophan kind of teaches, and like I say, his book is in the library, or in the bookstore, if any of you are interested. So I'm not really going to cover any more what he said. Oh, sorry, one more section, I guess, in his book, that then the last section was the one that is the shortest section, because this is the section most of us aren't ready for yet, which is after we are purified and we are illuminated, then we appreciate the hesychia, or silence, and we have this life that becomes passionless and with dispassion, so we can deal with things without being drawn by our emotions and passions into it. Not that we aren't concerned or dedicated about it, but we approach it with more objectivity from God's perspective, so to speak, rather than from how we're drawn by our own ego needs, so to speak. So this is the living communion with God, this living in communion with God, which people like St. Theophan develop themselves to a way where they receive this kind of grace and we're able to live a good portion of their life in this condition, as were the apostles and most of the church fathers that we know.
Father Charles, St. Theophan had no communication or connection with the outside world?
He would write letters, and he had an assistant that he lived with him, and he was given permission to do divine liturgy every day by himself, which is very unusual because you're supposed to have lay people also involved. So he basically lived by himself for the last 20 years, but he was in ongoing communication with his spiritual children, so to speak, giving out of. That's why we have so much of his writings, And he wrote a lot through these letters, but he was always writing to people like us here. How do you perfect yourself in the spiritual life? And that's why he's so good, because he writes very clearly, but he's writing at a level that's geared for the life we have, as opposed to the life of a monk. So a lot of these spiritual fathers, you have to be careful that you don't pick up one that is teaching monks, because they have different kinds of issues. Not that it's any different, the end goal isn't different, but their life is different. So they have different needs. So many fathers, such as St. Theophan, are very good because they're thinking of our daily kind of life.
Do you think maybe that's why Father Polycarp is a monk, right? Maybe that's why he's not really getting to the kids' level, because he's so different.
Could be. Or maybe just because he's new out of school, too, right? So he
just wants to teach them everything he learned.
Right. Mm-hmm. Okay, so I'm going to really follow the teaching, and this article it's a mini book, you might say, is online on our website. Father George Kapsanis, who is he is a monk, an abbot at the monastery on Mount Athos, but he has a very clear writing about the subject of theosis, the true purpose of the human life. So that's kind of I'm going to follow his basic outline and teaching in what I'm going to present on theosis today. A highly condensed version of what he has in this little piece he wrote. Okay, the incarnation and theosis of man are the great mysteries of the church. We kind of talked about this. This is all hard to grasp, right? So it's not something we're going to teach in Sunday school very, very much, right? Because the kids at that level can't grasp it. But we who have experienced life, who have struggled with the spiritual life, can begin to think about the real significance of the incarnation and the idea of theosis and the mysticism that is all involved in it, that it goes beyond what is purely rational in our way of thinking. And we'll see this in all aspects of the church, in our liturgies, in the sacraments, in the hymns, in the icons, and even in the architecture of the church. This mystical nature is totally involved. And that's why even when strangers come to our church, what do they always say? I experienced something different here, right? Something special. It's because everything is geared towards lifting yourself to more the mystical nature of the teachings. So we have the dome with the Pantocrator, right, peering down at us, right? And wherever you are in the church, his eyes are looking right at you, right? So that was an important thing to add to our church. And we should also think it's important to complete the iconography, because it's all part of giving us this feeling. And our church is still pretty bare compared to how it should be. So we also have we have the Theotokos, right? There with her arms upraised in prayer, pointing up to the Pantocrator ceiling with what? Christ bursting from her womb. And what does the saying say on it? Pateteraton auranun, right? Wider than the heavens is what it's saying. Anyone that would carry Christ in her womb and give birth to God must be wider than the heavens. So it's an exclamation about the incredible role that she has. And she is where? She's in that intermediate spot between heaven, which is the dome, and where we are, which is earth, right? So she's the one that God chose to bring His Son from heaven to earth. So she's in that intermediary position in the church. So it all has some significance that can speak to us subconsciously, so to speak. So she's the bridge by which God descends, and that's why she is honored and in that particular place in the church normally. In the front of a church, then what do we do? On the Kanastasis, what do we have? We have all these deified men and women, right? That achieve this condition we're seeking, right? So they all are saints of the church, from St. Andrew on one side all the way to what? Who's on the right side? St. Nicholas, right? And in between we have St. Catherine, and then we have St. George, and then we'll have St. John, and then we'll have St. Barbara going across here. So again, they're reminding us, and then we have the story that goes across the top, the gospel story going across the top, and then the disciples. The 12 apostles are up here. So it's all there reminding us of our purpose. That on the walls, if you take a church that's totally decorated, it should be all covered with the stories from the life of either the martyrs of the church or the life of Christ. So when our church is completed, all its walls will be covered with icons. And you go into older churches, or the Holy Cross in Holy Trinity. What's the one in Charlotte? Holy Trinity, right? That one's totally covered, right, with icons. So that's more typical. And anyone been to the new church down in Columbia? They're just completing their iconography. And it's almost all covered now with icons all around. The dome is all covered and everything. So again, those are the stories that we go in there and are reminded of through the architecture of the church. So through the church and its not only its physical being but its teaching, we can see God's plan and our purpose through all of these different dimensions. And everything speaks of the incarnation of God and draws us towards this idea of theosis. So what is the difference between followers of Christ versus being a philosopher or moral teacher? You guys should know this, right?
One is inward directed, the other is outward directed.
And by outward you mean?
Teaching others. Or
Teaching others. And maybe more mental, right? So we're making logical leaps and bounds through our mind and drawing conclusions and projecting those and then teaching outward. And Christ is what? We're followers of Christ, we believe, because we see what was revealed, right? It's not a philosophy. It's what God revealed in the flesh through the coming of the Son and what He taught. And then what His followers wrote down to leave for us. So even with our unworthiness, to baptize one, then we become members of Christ's body. And it's not through our thinking that this happens, but it's through a sacrament, a work of the Holy Spirit that this takes place. Not through some long course of study, although you will be prepared before you go into baptism to affirm your faith and to understand what you're entering into, but it becomes something more than thinking, right? That's it's all about. And then even as dead members, like I was for many years, with repentance, we become renewed and become living members again. So anyone, even someone who's dropped out of coming to church for a period, is always welcome back through repentance and can become totally alive again in Christ. So the sacraments are really essential to this whole way of life that we're talking about and to our theosis. This is the experience of the Holy Spirit and the actual Holy Communion. We're sharing in the actual blood and body of Christ Himself. And nothing more glorious than this could we partake. So, and that's what the whole liturgy is designed for us to participate, not to come and watch and be spectators. Because in essence, we're denying Christ when we do that. We're denying what He's calling to us and what He's giving to us, that He gave His blood and body for us, and He's given it to us, and yet many of us will deny it when we come into church. So we need to participate. It's essential if we're going to move towards this idea of theosis. Otherwise, we're just going to remain spectators for our whole life. So the church is where we work to realize our union with God and develop this deified human nature through the grace of God. It's where we're going to receive that grace through our following the teachings of the church and participating in the sacramental life of the church. We'll talk more about this when we have the session on worship. So, to understand this, Gregory Palamas amplified some thoughts that were in the church from the very early days about God and that God is both essence and energy. So we separate these two things. It's like the sun and its rays, right? We know the sun has this essence that we don't really know from here, right? Unless we're scientists and making probes and stuff like that. What we do know about the sun is the heat and the energy that comes from it that we receive, right? So we don't have to know the essence of the sun to experience His energies. So this is the same analogy with God. God in essence we can't know, but His energies we can experience and become one with Him through His energies. So if He were only essence, what would be the problem? If God didn't have the energies, but He only had essence, His being, what would be the problem?
Couldn't feel His presence in our life.
Yeah, we wouldn't know Him, right? We couldn't really know Him in any way because we can't know His essence because it's so beyond what we're capable of. So He'd be unapproachable for us. And God would be made kind of self-sufficient, removed, and unable to communicate with all His creation. He would have no means of communicating, even though He'd still be all-powerful. So to know His essence is an analogy that Father George uses here that would be like grabbing the end of an open electric transmission wire. We'd just be blown apart if we ever were directly experience the true essence of God. And the energies we can compare to that as the light that's coming from a light bulb. The same energy, the same source, right? But here it's now the light that we're experiencing, which we're experiencing the energies that come from the transmission line. So we become gods through His energy and not His essence. So you hear there's passages in Scripture that says you cannot know God, right? What that means is you can't know His essence, but you can know and experience His energies. This is the mysticism, the mystical dimension of the Orthodox Church. So the Church Fathers affirmed that God was filled with divine eros and had infinite ecstatic love and seeks to unite with us. They're constantly teaching this idea of the love that God has that's given to us through His energies. And it's how He's present in nature. And we can experience those energies in nature as well, walking through the woods. At least I experienced it that way. And how He preserved the world, how He keeps things going, and the world still perpetuating itself. And He illumines, He sanctifies, He deifies man through these uncreated energies. So it's these energies that we need to tap into. And that's how we are united with Him, through God's energies. And this, again, is the true mystery and the greatest mystery of the Orthodox faith and life, is knowing the energies of God and participating in them. Gregory Palamas experienced God. He was a bishop and a monk on Mount Athos for a period of time. He was in Thessaloniki, so you can go and see his relics there in church downtown Thessaloniki. And his divine energies, he experienced God's divine energies and experienced the uncreated light that the holy apostles sought at the Transfiguration. And many saints have experienced this, and many elders in Mount Athos have experienced this, and there are many stories about this that you can read. And I'm going to hand one out to you at the end of St. Simeon, which also puts in the context, St. Simeon says, this is the way you will be when you enter into heaven. But you can experience that now while you're still on earth. You don't have to wait till you go to heaven. And so Gregory Palamas experienced this and lived this, and his monks also were able to develop the same kind of relationship with God, where they were given this gift of the uncreated light of God, the same ones that the apostles saw during the Transfiguration. Now there's a Western monk named Barlaam. He was Orthodox, but he was Western in his mind and thinking. And he had a very rational, he was a philosopher, and he could not believe Gregory Palamas. And he accused the monks as being heretical and deluded for having these kinds of supernatural experiences. And he started a big argument in the church. And he said such an experience was created. It was created in their imagination. They were just imagining this relationship that the monks were having with God. So this was a battle between the mystic and the philosopher that took place. So who do you think won? Gregory Palamas, of course, right? And he made great treatises in this defense, which are available today, called the triads, and so we can benefit from this reading as well. And much of his work is still untranslated into English. So their debate brought to clarity the nature of God as essence and energy. It clarified this issue in the church and made it very clear, even though it had been taught from the earliest day. You can see the same teaching in St. Athanasius the Great. His writings focus on the truth of this uncreated life as being the energies of God which deify men who experience this uncreated light. And this is the same thing that happened to the apostles at Pentecost, isn't it? The tongue of fire, they called it there. And the Spirit being with them. And then they're transformed in this process, right? And able to do healings and bring the word to many people and lead others to Christ. So this was the light of Mount Tabor. This was the argument that Palamas advanced. It's the same light. What they were experiencing was the same light that Christ and the apostles experienced with Christ on Mount Tabor during the Transfiguration. It was not symbolic, was his point. So there was 3 great synods of the church that occurred in that affirmed his teachings. So they became accepted, just as an ecumenical council. So often these 3 synods are referred to as the 8th council, as an example. So he declared that the life in Christ is not simply the moral edification of man, but theosis, participation in God's glory, the vision of God, His grace, and uncreated light. So like I've said before, that many people go, what do you mean? Is that orthodoxy is not a moral system, right? It's not an ethical system. It's about this. It's not simply the moral edification, but more importantly, it's about theosis, the participation in God's energies, His glory, the vision of God, His grace, and the uncreated light. So what's the implication of this doctrine? What are some things that might be the implications to our lives or our approach to our faith? Does it help you to know this at all? I mean, knowing this, what does it mean? This is a big debate. It gave clarity that's supposed to be important for us. Why is it important to you? Is it important? Does it make any sense? Say something.
We can, through our petition, with our participation, become closer to God. That is possible.
It's possible, right? We can have a much greater experience of thinking of the uncreated light of Mount Tabor. That's available to all of us. We all have that same potential, right? But the implications are, what do we need to do to come close to God like that? This is what Christ meant, to be perfected, right? That we should be working on our lives to have this kind of relationship with God. Now, some of us may have it. We don't know always who has this kind of relationship with God. Usually we know by the way they they live and the way they teach others and bring others to Christ. It becomes obvious. So this was in the 14th century this took place. And the Constantinople Council took place in Constantinople, was considered the most important. And they came up with 3 conclusions to this debate, were recorded from this council. And I'm going to give them to you, so don't get bored here. There's 8 of them, I think. 8, yeah. Number 1, there is in God a distinction between the essence and the energies, or energy. Either way, you can say it either way. 2, the energy of God is not created, but is uncreated. So this is something that we make up. This is an uncreated energy that comes from God Himself. It's an experience of God, not some emotional insight or something that comes from our imagination. 3, this distinction between the uncreated essence and the uncreated energies does not in any way impair the divine simplicity. In other words, God is still without part. These aren't 2 parts of God. These are all part of the one God. So we kind of have to separate the parts because this is how we experience it. But there is still no multiple parts to God. God still maintains His divine simplicity. 4, the term deity may be applied not only to the essence of God, but to the energies. So the energies we reflect are God Himself, in other words. 5, the essence enjoys a certain priority or superiority in relationship to the energies, in the sense that the energies proceed from the essence. Just like we say the Holy Spirit proceeds from the Father, right? You see the parallel here with the Holy Spirit? And the Holy Spirit is how we experience many of the energies of God, right? 6, man can participate in God's energies, but not in His essence. 7, divine energies may be experienced by men in the form of light, a light which, though beheld through men's bodily eyes, is in itself non-material light. This isn't a physical light. It's an uncreated light. But you can see it with your eyes. This is the uncreated light that was manifested to the apostles at the Transfiguration on Mount Tabor, that is seen during the prayer by the saints in our own time, and that will shine upon and from the righteous at their resurrection on the last day. So this is what we will experience at the resurrection if we're being called to God. It thus possesses an eschatological character. It is the light of the age to come. So it's what we will experience, that we can experience now for the eternal life. This is all affirmed as doctrine of the church, okay? No energy is to be associated with one divine person to the exclusion of the other 2. But the energies are shared in common by all 3 persons of the Trinity. So we can't say it's just the Holy Spirit, but also Christ and the Father. So St. Gregory made it really clear that we can participate in God's very nature and become one with Him via His grace. This is the power of the divine energy that we can participate in on earth and in heaven, though in different degrees. And it becomes a fundamental doctrine on the church. Okay, I'm going to ask you again, what are the implications of this teaching?
The non-believers, just like you said, the Western monk.
Yeah.
Thanks to St. Gregory for saying those things. That
Right. So if we don't believe in this ability, right, we aren't truly believing in the teachings of Christ and the church. I mean, why did he show this to the apostles during the Transfiguration? Many people will deny this dimension of the church, right? Try to deny it. They'll try to deny there's something special in the sacraments. They'll even talk about Holy Communion as something that's symbolic. Many Christian churches deny the sacramental life of the church, especially the Baptist. But this is fundamental to our Orthodox faith. And this is our purpose, to develop ourselves so we can have this intimate relationship with God and experience in our daily lives the energies of God. Okay, so how do we qualify for theosis? Do we want to qualify? Or do we want to remain philosophers, right? Because most of us probably pretty philosophical about religious things as well as other things, right? That's our normal worldly way of life, isn't it? To use logic. So it has a purpose, but not a very good purpose for our spiritual life. So how do we qualify for theosis? First, we got to remember it's a gift from God. God's going to determine when He gives us this gift. But we can prepare ourselves to be worthy to receive it. So this has got to be our work, right? So we have a lot of work to do to receive this gift. St. Gregory became worthy after much struggle, cleansing themselves of passions and prayer. And he taught his followers how to do this. So we must desire, we must struggle, as Paul says over and over again, right? And prepare ourselves so we are worthy and capable of receiving this, right? God's going to not give us a gift like this if we're going to use it for our ego-centered purposes, right? Because we could easily become really demonic in that sense, right? Of using these extra powers that come with this kind of knowledge. Okay, here are the qualifications taught by the Church Fathers. First is humility. Now, many people argue against humility and say, well, false humility is this awful stuff and people just pretend they're humble, right? If it is false, it is terrible. But humility is the most important thing to develop. And what do we mean by this? What is humility? Without this humility, you cannot accept the purpose that your life is outside of yourself. So you see, if we keep ego-centered and think and my thinking is what's most important, I'm not allowing this outside source to become bigger than me. So this is a violation of the first commandment, isn't it? Father Tom was saying the other day, as we had some discussion about this, and saying that the most common sin that's dealt with in confession through his experience is the first commandment. I'm going to remind you of that because it's not having God as primary in our lives. That having this humility, recognizing that there is a purpose for our life that's outside of ourselves. So it's not having my children and taking care of my children. It's not just that. It's not having this career and being successful in this career. It's not just that. It's not about being good citizens. It's not just that. It's knowing God and honoring God with our full heart all the time, who is a power that's outside of ourselves, and doing what we can to have our will joined with His will. It's not possible to unite with God if we believe that we can be perfected by our own efforts. This is an error that's made by many people who go down the path of Buddhism. That they get into their own efforts, and often they get become kind of cranky people too. You should tell when people are practicing ascetic practices for their own, just for their own benefit and for their own efforts, like for stress reduction or something like that. Often their practice will make them more cranky. They'll be, because you interfere with my practice, you'll upset them, right? But someone is on the path to theosis, you upset them, they'll gladly step away to meet a need of another sojourner, another one on the same journey, right? Because we're all potentially gods sitting here. So this is the way of the current world. Man is the center of all efforts to create a better world. God's not needed. It's called the secular world. That's the world we live in. That we're really influenced by that. So for Orthodox, everything is Christ-centered. We must accept that the center of the world is Christ and not ourselves. This is the idea of faith. This is the fundamental idea of faith and the idea of the first commandment. So to begin, we have to acknowledge the purpose of life is outside ourselves. It's with our Father, our Maker, our Creator, the one that initiated the Big Bang, right? The one that allowed all this stardust to come together in terms of living cells and develop all the organisms, including ourselves. And the one who gave us the living soul so we become united with Him. It's with our Father, our Maker, our Creator. So we have to also realize that we need healing, that we aren't where we can be. That we are like from Adam and Eve, right? We separated from God and we suffer from the consequences. The kind of life that we have, we're facing death, we have the fear of death, that we're weak. We're still in need of healing. And we're filled with passions that control us, our bodily, being still the animal parts of us, are strong and too often dominant in our lives and taking control and burying the soul, so to speak. So we have to maintain this humility and never think of our progress in coming closer to God as due to our own efforts. This is the idea of humility. We have to depend on the grace of God. Any other thoughts about humility? It's a little different idea of humility than maybe you normally think, right? So it's putting the context of our spiritual life and what it means to be humble is really to be what? To surrender ourselves to God's will, right? The second is asceticism. So with humility, we've got to start with faith and humility, right? And as our next task is then to tame these passions, because now with humility we want to tame them. It's not going to be an effort for it. It's going to be something that we're motivated to do. To purify these things that are taking place in us that we don't like that would take place. And we want to be purified of these passions that separate us from God, that keep us from being constantly in tune with God's will. So we begin by applying to our lives the commandments with effort, trying to be as good adherents as we can. And we constantly involve the repentance, confession, participation in the sacrament of Holy Communion. And we got to have a lot of patience that this is a lifelong effort. It's not something we're going to work at for a couple months and we'll master it. That's like we think of a lot of things in life, right? That if we just work at it for a couple months and I'll get my weight under control or whatever it'll be, right? No. We got to have patience that God's grace is going to come when it comes, and as long as we're working towards, eventually He will abide with us as long as we remain sincere and have this patience and maintain this humility. So as God's grace is hidden in His commandments, and as we observe them, we unite with Him. So as we begin to receive more and more grace as we're going through these ascetic practices, we're going to understand the commandments more and more in a much deeper way, and we're going to be able to carry them out in a greater way. And we'll become more virtuous in our way of life through grace that comes through it. We never will totally through our own efforts. So what happens when we make it just our own efforts? What do we become like to others? Pharisees. We become people that are preaching, right? We become kind of angry people, right? There's a lot of angry people around that are trying to be virtuous, right? And they're angry that people aren't doing this and they aren't doing that and those aren't doing those things, right? Where they're themselves and you look at their lives, they can't do them either. And usually the most things you complain about others are things you don't like in yourself. Those are things you really know that you talk about others with. So examine your what do you call it when you talk among each other? Gossip, right? So examine your gossip, or how you talk about others. And then take a look at those things that you see in others that you don't like. You're going to find out what to work on in yourself. So what's the nature of uprooting these passions that we have? What's the nature of this effort that we're talking about to make? What have you experienced in trying to have a daily prayer routine, follow the fasting, participate actively? What have you experienced? What's the nature of this task to purify our heart?
It's not easy.
Yeah, it's really difficult, and it takes a lot of effort. This is not something that comes for free. We have to work at it with a lot of effort. And Father George says, you cannot receive the Holy Spirit if you do not give the blood of your heart, he says, to the struggle, to cleanse yourself of the passions, to repent really and in depth in order to acquire the virtues. And the key with this is love. We always got to remember this. Love embodies all the virtues. It overcomes selfishness and our love for ourselves. So everything has to be done out of love of God. This ascetic process isn't for ourselves. This is out of our love of God and our love of others. So we will begin to love others in a much bigger, broader way than we can now. So to overcome our selfishness and gain love is the reason for asceticism. And without it, no spiritual life, no struggle, and no progress. So everything's got to be out of this love of God and love for others. The two greatest commandments, right? Here's how Paul describes his struggles. One of my favorite passages. For I know that in me, that is in my body, my flesh, nothing good dwells. For to will is present with me, but how to perform what is good I do not find. Right? We all experience this, don't we? I know what I'm supposed to do, but somehow it's hard to do. For the good that I will to do, I do not do, but the evil I will not to do, that I practice. So there's something that takes me away from I know what I want to do. Now, if I do what I will not to do, it is no longer I who do it, but sin that dwells within me. There's some sinfulness in me, some activity, right, it's taking place. And I find in a law that evil is present with me, the one who wills to do good. For I delight in the law of God according to the inward man. the heart. But I see another law in my members, warring against the law of my mind and bringing me into captivity to the law of sin, which is in my members. So can you relate to this passage of Paul? How he's describing the nature of our sinfulness and the struggle that we have within? Now, Paul, you'd have to say, was a pretty perfected person, right? I mean, he was lifted up to the third heaven by Christ, right? And totally transformed from a persecutor of the church to one that became the greatest teacher of the church. Yet, he constantly teaches that this is an ongoing struggle for him as well as for us. So it's not something that you get to a certain stage and you don't have to worry. Everything comes naturally. There's always this force in us. And what do you call this force in us? What do we normally call it? Sin. What else? Devil, the demons. Some force, right? There's some negative force that seems to be embodied in us that keeps us from doing everything that we know we want to be ideally. So if we write down on the paper what I'd want to be ideally, according to God's teachings, and I know these are the teachings, then we start this other column, here's what I actually do, and you start looking, now why do I do this and not this? Right? There's some force in there that says I'm doing this, but this is what I know I want to do. So this is the struggle. This is what we have to get in touch with. Questions. Why is it we find it so difficult to do what God commands us to do? Why are our intentions so often not carried out? Have you ever thought about that at all? Why is this so difficult, this difference between what I want to do and what I actually do? Well, let's explore it a little bit. First of all, there's the brain. This is part of our physical body, right? This is not the mind or the soul. This is the brain itself. What is the brain? It's got a bunch of things that are all connected up there, right? It's got some programming built into it, so we can respond and act to our environment. So it has etched in it patterns of behavior, whether it be sleep, whether it be donuts, whether it be Duff beer, whether it be sex, whatever it may be, right? There's things, patterns in our mind that give us natural reactions, right? That we just respond out of habit or instinct. So these patterns become our weakness. This is where we are tempted by any negative forces or evil forces or the devil, whatever you want to think of it as. And this is where we fall down, right? We get tempted where we are programmed weak in our brain. So where our sinful tendencies are engraved, so they will be repeated often. Once it's programmed up there, all those little connections are made. We're going to do it over and over and over and over and over and over and over again until we change the programming we got in our head. And the devil knows this programming that we have and constantly is tempting us. This is why it's so difficult. So we need to understand what's going on up here. Something about the brain. So let's look at some of that. First, what is the brain? You all learned this in biology, right?
A bunch of neurons.
Yeah, it's a bunch of cells, right? A bunch of living cells, right, that are connected, and they all stored up here in some form, right? It's a part of the body, right? It's chemicals and living cells. It's an organ that integrates the soul, the body, and the external world. Right? We take in stuff through our eyes. The brain allows us to process that, make some sense out of it, and to move our arms, our legs, mouths, whatever it may be, right? So it allows the body to adapt and interact with the environment. That's what the function of the brain is. It takes input from all the senses and creates this integrated world view. I mean, think, we're just taking light in, we're taking sound in, we're taking chemicals in for smell, right? And we're making a whole picture out of it. Like we see something real in this whole room. The brain is creating all that for us. And if we saw a fire in the corner, we know enough to get up and run out the room, right? So it's going to give us instructions to do in certain conditions. And we learned those things, right? And kids, we always had to touch something hot to learn that you don't touch things hot, right? And that gets programmed. Don't do that again. Don't do that again. That'll hurt you. That'll hurt you. So it's... Yeah, exactly. That's part of our animal nature. That's how we were created as animals before we were given the soul. So the brain has the means for regulation of the bodily functions. Also, it keeps our heart beating. We keep breathing. We don't think about how we breathe. We don't think how our heart beats, right? It just does. And the brain is also taking care of that. And its focus is on the body and the bodily needs. The brain is not focused on God. It's focused on the body. And it's an incredibly complex network of these physical connections. And here we got what's going on. There's 100 billion of these neurons, these complicated cells here. And these synapses, that's the points of connection, right? Like we see here, these ends, where they're connected. There's 100 trillion of those. Now, those are numbers that are beyond what we can even imagine, right? So it's really complex, chemical. And in between here, it's not digital. There's receptors, but then there's chemicals between here that determine the intensity of the connection. So not only is it like all these potential digital connections, they're all analog connections on top of it. So it's infinite, the possible combinations that can be made. It is really an incredible organ when you really begin to look at it. It makes me want to go study it or something, right? I mean, it's just so incredible, so beautiful. How could God create something like that? So we can look at sinful tendencies in two ways. The devil who tempts us and our mental programming that produces the automatic response and the passions. And we can probably get most benefit out of this, which will allow us to take care of this. Okay? So let's see what some science has helped us with. First, let's review the passions. What are the passions? Emotions that control us. Sexual desire, anger, envy, desire for material goods, rejection. You can probably think of 100 of them, right? Your passions that you respond to. Desires that cannot be satisfied. Material goodies, right? Get the television one year, and then you see they come out with a new model, and it's a little bit bigger and a little bit brighter. You want that model. The next year they come out with it's a little bit bigger and a little bit brighter. It's better sound. You want that model. Then they come up with the stereo and the surround sound, and you got to have that, and you have that model. Then they got one you hang in your wall, and you have a projector. I mean, it goes on and on, right? It never ends. Or they come up with a computer or iPhone, or they come up with the iPad, and it goes on. I'm in gadgets, so I know well that dimension of it, but it's in all aspects of our life, right? They're never-ending desires. And they express our egoism, our self-centered. It's all about what I want somehow. Attempts to satisfy spiritual longing. There's something lingering that we want these desires, but we're doing it by the wrong means. We're going after the wrong things. So the body is responding to something that hasn't properly processed yet. Jesus says, from within, out of the heart of man comes evil thoughts. From within. Out of the heart of man comes evil thoughts. Fornication, theft, murder, adultery, coveting, wickedness, deceit, licentiousness, envy, slander, pride, foolishness. It depends a few things there, right? From within. Out of the heart of man come these evil thoughts. All these things come from within, and they defile man. Okay, so they're coming within us. They're not coming from God or any place. The passions are forces that enter into our soul and become patterns etched in our brains, programmed into automatic responses, and we've got to figure out how to root them out. Some of this may be heredity. Some we may inherit from our parents, right? They had programs in their brain that got coded somehow genetically, and so the next generation gets those same patterns built into them. So that's why some families might have certain sinful orientations compared to other families, right? From heredity. So overcoming sinfulness is really difficult. There's no simple thing about it. I guess that's the point here, right? So there's two types of passions: natural and unnatural passions. So what would a natural passion be? Hunger, right. So these are the things that depend on nature, not on our will. Appetite for food. So we have built into our system some hunger that comes up for us to eat, right? Because we need to eat to nourish the body and to take care of it. That's a natural passion. Fear of being harmed. So we're going to protect ourselves. We're going to duck when something's thrown at us so it doesn't smash our head and crush our skull. And sexual attraction. So we have natural sexual attraction. That's for the reproduction and perpetuation of the species, right? That's all natural. So there's these natural passions, but what happens is these natural passions can be distorted, become unnatural passions. So the natural are necessary for us to preserve our nature. And they're, you might say, the animal aspect of our being. That's a good thing that we have. But if we go beyond the need for self-preservation, then they become problematic. Right? And the one that we hear most about, right, is probably the sexual attraction, right? That goes beyond, it gets turned into something that becomes pleasure outside of marriage, right? And becomes something that's very destructive. And it's not for self-preservation. It's for our ego sense and our ego needs. Unnatural passions. What do we all long for? Well, we want to be one with God, right? Underneath everything, there's this longing that we have to be with God, right? But we mistakenly connect our longing for spiritual wholeness with these natural passions. So we think by having all these goodies, by having all these pleasures in life, that we're going to be satisfied. But has anyone found that works? Anyone experienced that works? It works for a while, right? There comes a point when you say, wait a minute, I still need this. I still feel like I'm lacking something, right? So there's always this searching. So we seek pleasure or happiness only to find pain on the other end, then we seek more pleasure. You know, like we take the big vacation, we go to the beach, we have a great time for a week, then we come back and we moan and cry because we got to pay the bills for what we spent there while we're there, right? So it's an ongoing cycle. So St. Maximus says, when man isn't focused on distinguishing between what is spiritual and things with the senses, he disobeys the divine command. He errs when the irrationality of feeling is the only form of discernment, and he's captured by pleasure and avoidance by pain. Okay, Antonio Damasio, a researcher, gives us some insight about how emotions work. This is kind of how we can see how these passions work as well. It gives us some insight about how we deal with them. There's a process he discovered, outlined. Something from our senses initiates a response. We sense something taken in from any one of our senses. It initiates a response in our brain. The brain then sends a command to other regions of the brain and most everywhere in the body proper. So immediately signals are going out throughout the body. In the bloodstreams, commands are sent in the form of chemical molecules that then act on receptors in the cells of the body tissues. In the neuron pathways, commands take the form of electromechanical signals which act on other neurons or on muscular fibers and organs, which in turn can release chemicals of their own into the bloodstream. And this results in a global change in the state of the organism. Right? So if someone's angry at you and they start yelling at you and start like they're getting ready to hit you, something automatically takes to your whole body, right? It's not just in your head. Your heart starts beating differently. You feel maybe a tingling somewhere in your body, depending on your nature, right? That you'll feel different kinds of senses. So eventually we become aware of this feeling we have, right? So what's the lesson here? What we know from science about dealing with these responses that we call passions. If that's the process it goes through, what's the implication of that? If we wait till we feel it, it's all over, right? We've already reacted, already responded. So we can't wait for the feelings to develop in a controlled behavior. There have been a lot of psychologists and that teach the idea, well, you stick on your feelings and then you respond to your feelings. Well, usually by then it's too late. So we need to learn, this is what the fathers teach. We need to interact at the time of the stimulus and work to change the automatic response of this emotional response. It's called watchfulness. Okay, another researcher dealt with this idea of attention and watchfulness. The Mindful Brain by Daniel Siegel. He says, we can actually focus our minds in a way that changes the structure and function of the brain throughout our lives. Okay, we can change that programming. That's a big insight. People didn't believe that for a long time. Attentional processes, emotion regulation, capacity to observe internally, to introspect and reflect are all considered trainable skills. So we don't have to accept these patterns that we have. We can modify them. And this is how we can prepare for cooperation with God. We must develop this attentiveness in our mind. So the brain imaging studies they did suggest that the frontal lobe is critical in directing our ability to act freely and make decisions. And this can be interpreted that free will is conscious choice involving an introspective monitoring of the self. So they identified where in the brain this takes place. And the more you concentrate on a moral idea, the easier it becomes to act on that belief. See how we reprogram ourselves? This is why the church is so repetitive in what it does. It's building patterns in your brain, helping you build patterns. This is why prayer is so important, to be repetitive and constant and daily. That's why contemplation of Scripture is constantly programming the brain on a moral ideas. He put it here. He isn't an Orthodox Christian. I don't even know if he's a Christian. But he's talking about if you concentrate on a moral idea, you're going to be able to act on it more easily. And the frontal lobes, again, monitor our ability to stay attentive and alert, helping us to focus on the task. And they've done studies with nuns and Buddhists and other people in prayer and meditation that shows they have greater activity in this frontal lobes of their brains. Their brains have developed differently. So they are more attentive and more sensitive in this way. So they can show that it makes a difference for those who engage in a life of prayer or meditation, that it changes how attentive they are. Another researcher, very interesting one, Andrew Newberg. If you want to maintain a sense of well-being, you have to work at it, continually reinforcing positive feelings and beliefs. It's one of the benefits of religious ritual. That's why our rituals are so significant. And why they're so, how's the sense of, what would you call our rituals? They're rich, right? They involve all the senses. It's not going to an empty room and hearing a preacher. It's you're stimulated by the incense. You're stimulated by the visual icons. You're stimulated by everything that takes place by the music and so forth, right? And the repetitiveness of it. You go to church today, it's the same as if you go to church tomorrow. With difference of different hymns. The key to creating any reality is based on a concentrated repetition of ideas. So the more we stay focused on our object of contemplation, the more real this thought becomes in us. So we've got to make sure what we concentrate on is the right things. They're the things that are in the gospel book, and not something else. So as he says, we want to be careful what you pray or meditate on, because it will eventually become your personal truth. And if you want to make spirituality, want to make God a central part of your life, then by all means, focus on God. Focus on spiritual ideals as often as you can. And Peter reinforces this idea. It says, gird up the loins of your mind, not conforming yourself to the former lust, but you also be holy in all your conduct. Gird up the loins, he says. So, of your mind. And gird up the loins. They would take their dresses, right, or skirts, or this kind of outfit, and they'd wrap it around so they could engage in battle, right? They'd prepare themselves. Girding their loins was a matter of preparing yourselves to run. So this way you've got to prepare yourself, prepare your mind by not conforming to our lust. And if we follow the research that's been done, how do we do it? Got to concentrate on the rituals, concentrate on God, concentrate on the teachings of the gospel. This requires some regular, ongoing practice for this concentration to take place, right? Peter also says, abstain from fleshly lust which war against the soul. Submit yourselves to every ordinance. So he's also giving you another idea. Where you know that you are tempted, don't engage in that activity. Stay away from, if the bar is where you get in trouble, don't go to the bar. Or whatever it may be, right in your case. If it's the TV that's taking up all your time, turn the TV off. If it's the internet that's sucking up all your time and giving you bad vibes because you find all these weird things to check out on the internet, don't engage on the internet. If it's Facebook, get rid of Facebook. I mean, we make these choices, right? You can avoid where we have our temptations. Paul says, put to death, therefore, what is earthly in you, unchastity, uncleanness, passion, evil desire, greed, which is idolatry. But now put them all away, anger, wrath, malice, slander, foul talk of your mouth. Do not lie to one another, seeing you have put off the old nature with its practices and have put on the new nature, which is being renewed in knowledge after the image of His creature. So we want to work at transforming ourselves to be like Christ, the new nature. And our old nature is more of our animal self, or the one that's in this habitual pattern of sin. So the church shows us the way to deal with this difficult task. We can't do it by ourselves. It requires grace of the Holy Spirit. And this is what we call purification of the heart, which involves this process of continual repentance. It's a difficult path, as we've talked already, requiring attention, watchfulness, persistence, and endurance. And this is the idea of synergia, right? We have to cooperate with grace. This is not a cooperation between equals, but working with the Almighty God. So it's not about earning our salvation, but it's about cooperating with grace. We talked about last time. And lessons, this is a lesson we can learn from the life of Mary, the most holy Theotokos. Especially the Annunciation, where we received the inquiry from God, and she said yes, right? And she carried out that life in obedience to God. And that's what we're called out, to be like her. So she gives us an excellent example as well. Okay, I think we're running out of time here, right? You got a few more minutes? Finish up here? Okay, why do so few reach theosis and have direct knowledge of God? Why is there so few? It's difficult, right? What we said before. And it involves the attachment to the basic cares of life. We've all talked about it in here too, right? We have to go to work. We have to take care of our children. We have to take care of our parents. There's all these things of daily life that we are engaged in that seem to distract us from doing all these in the name of God. But there's no reason it has to be. But we're attached to them, and they become our main purpose, not our secondary purpose. So we make them the primary purpose, and we lose our connection with God. So we don't place theosis as the primary purpose of our lives. We place instead our profession, our family, our studies, charitable activities are given higher priority, and this is violation of the first commandment. It's not we don't pay attention to these. We always give our first priority to God. So anyway, this is the violation of the first commandment. And we become attached to all the beautiful things of this world and lose sight of the heavenly things. This world becomes what is most important and most beautiful to us. And we can't even think anymore about what it means to be in heaven with God. It's not even in our daily thought. So we become too busy for even the ascetic practices. We don't have time for prayer. We don't have time for this or that. And I can't adapt my diet because the kids want this certain brand of Cheerios or whatever it is, and therefore, we can't fast either, right? Because they'll never change, right? Besides, I don't want to change either. It's just too much trouble. I got to find a different way of doing things. So we don't engage in the struggle. We avoid it and set it aside, and we go on like we've always been, right? So ideally, we should do all we do for the glory of God. Everything we do should be for the glory of God. Caring for our children, dishing out the food at the restaurant, whatever it is, it should all be done for the glory of God. So we might want some reminders in all those places we do, wherever we are, a few icons, whatever it may be, to keep reminding us we're doing this all for the glory of God. When we lose this, we've lost everything. And death becomes death. We are dead at that moment, actually. So Christ said, "Seek first the kingdom of God, and all these things shall be added unto you." All will follow in beautiful virtue if everything is done in the name of God. In the Lord's Prayer, we say, "Thy kingdom come," right? What does that mean? It means the grace of the Holy Spirit come. So this is the uncreated light. This is what deifies us. This is what we, deep down, are seeking for, to have that union with God. Because when we're united with Him, there's nothing that's going to give us discomfort. We'll have continual joy. Second challenge is moralism. And this is basing our life based on moral improvement. It's more of a Western idea than an Eastern idea. So we can be good people by following these rules, right? And why is this a difficulty? Well, it's man-centered. It's based on our own effort. It's only on our effort. It's our own morality. We make up our own rule of what it means to be moral. And does not yield. We see this in the political arena today, right? There are certain people going around very hard promoting certain moral ideas for everybody else. I don't know what they're doing themselves, but at least they're promoted for everybody else. This is the problem. It's not bringing them closer to God. It's their own morality that they're teaching and preaching. Even if they're doing it themselves, they're doing it out of their own effort and not coming directly to this direct relationship with God. Now, it does not yield the general experience of God, so it's never satisfied, never at peace, and they often leads to atheism or indifference towards spiritual life. So you can be burnt out on this. And I can cite to you many cases. I know of people who have put everything on their own effort, done all the things in the church. They go to regular communion, they do fasting, they do all this stuff, but they didn't do it with the right. They did it out of their own effort. A problem comes up, they're burnt out, they become angry at God, they separate themselves totally from God. So the work of the church is to guide us properly towards theosis, the services, the sacraments, the patristic theology, the Christ-centered guidance that we get from our spiritual fathers. And when we view each other as prospective gods struggling, we see ourselves as struggling to be like God, right? Each of us. We're all struggling the same way, all of us. So our attitude begins to change towards each other. So we want to help them rather than criticize them. So anytime we find ourselves criticizing someone, we're taking the wrong approach. We'll be thinking about how to help that person come closer to God. Criticism is destructive, right? It's the constant sin that we engage in, usually in every social gathering that we enter into. We'll pick out someone to criticize. I'll guarantee you. As long as we're enclosed with ourselves, centered on our own ego, we're only individuals. But when we let go of this self-centeredness, then we become full persons in the eyes of God. And this ego encounters God, and I becomes thou. This is the great thing that can happen. This ego can be transformed into thou. And today, so many feel just these feel-good experiences, right? In the self-help industry that's out there, billions in size. Instead of seeking the experience of God, we constantly are seeking false substitutes. What are some of these that you probably participated in? Stress reduction programs. Anyone been involved in any of these self-help programs? They're on TV all over, right? Oprah promotes them all the time. All those people on those shows are promoting these self-help kind of ideas. Can be an exercise class. Can be a meditation class. Can be a yoga class. It can be a seminar on how to get along with your boss. They have all kinds of them, right? Depending on what area you're in. But the morality has, for the most part, lost its purpose. No longer leads us to one God, but becomes only rules. And there's no longer bonders to moralism, right? That's all relative. Your morals are this is okay, and you can have yours, and you're okay, and you can have yours, and you're okay, right? That's how we are today, isn't it? So there's no moral truth, right? There's no single moral thing that guides us. That we accept others because they have their own moral ideas. Now, part of that's how to love, which is okay, but it doesn't help us come closer to God, is my point. Okay, our inclinations and powers for achieving theosis are instead directed towards seeking pleasures in carnal worship. This is our problem. And life becomes purposeless. Maybe seems like it has purpose for the moment. Get my children through high school and get them into good college. And then what comes next? Then you got to figure, well, did I plan enough for retirement, right? So I can have a beautiful life when I retire. Goes on and on, right? But that's not our purpose, is it? Once we're laid out in that coffin and we're laying there on the solea, and we look back and we say, what was our purpose? It's none of the things of this world, is it? It's where we're being transported to at that particular moment. That's got to be our focus, and that's got to be our purpose. So it's important to devote our efforts to helping ourselves and others, okay? Avoid criticism. And try to help others to come closer to God. This is the task of theosis. It's the only way we're going to find true peace and salvation. It's how we'll be saved, right? There's 10 points. I'm going to hand out a little booklet. Some of you have this booklet, right? This little book called the 10-Point Program for Orthodox Life. I think some of you guys have it, right? You don't have one? I'll give you one. If anyone wants another one. Whoa.
I'm kidding.
I'll dive in mine, he doesn't. Yeah.
You want two of them? I think you probably have. Do you have one?
We can share.
Okay, it involves, these are 10 points. Praying daily, worshiping, participating in the sacraments, honoring the liturgical cycle. We'll cover these in more detail later. Using the Jesus prayer, slowing down and ordering your life, being watchful, taming the passions, putting others first, spiritual fellowship, and reading Scripture and the Holy Fathers. So there's 10 points here. If you begin to integrate these into your daily life, you'll be led towards the way of the Church and the way of the teachings of the Fathers, and towards a relationship with God. But you have to work at these. You have to make these all real in your life. You can't just say, "Yeah, I know that. I know that." If you're not going to do anything about it, make any changes in your life, don't bother reading it. I mean, it doesn't do you any good, all right, to read it. You have to read it because you want to do something to improve your relationship with God. That's my point. Okay, any questions?